Welcome everyone. I'm Amelia. I'm a psychologist. I specialize in anxiety and mood disorders. I run a clinic here in New York City where we again specialize in anxiety and mood and stress disorders. I currently do some teaching at Columbia and at Mount Sinai. I used to be a research professor at Ohio State for several years, doing a lot of academic research, once again on anxiety and stress. And I did a bit of a brief stint as a management consultant at BCG, which is one of the big three consulting firms. And today some of you guys who've been here before know the format here has been more me giving a presentation or Henri-Lee giving a presentation. But today we're doing the first series of Ask a Psychologist. And today we're going to be talking about and asking parenting related questions. So again, feel free to throw those questions at us on the chat function. So again, while I introduce the panelists that we have today, please send us questions you have. They could be parenting related. If they're also related to questions about managing anxiety and stress, feel free to send them our way as well. So very quickly, we have Dr. Ilyse Dobrow. She is also a licensed psychologist and specializes in anxiety and stress. And particularly, she specializes in working with moms of young kids. She's developed over the years an expertise in parenting, which is why I'm so excited that she's joining us today. She's done a lot of writing for some of the major outlets and some of the major publications like Scary Mommy, Psychology Today. More importantly, perhaps, she's written a book with CBT strategies for parenting, which is coming up within the next year. I had the privilege of reading some parts of that book, and I can attest that it's really good and packed with really useful advice. So
Thanks,
maybe
Amelia.
we can get, anytime. So maybe we can get some tips from Ilyse today, some previews from the book. And her private practice is in New Jersey. Then we have Andy De Los Reyes. He's a professor at the University of Maryland. He specializes in anxiety disorders in adolescents. And in particular, what Andy researches, which is something that we're going to be talking quite a bit about today, is the communication issues between children and their parents, and in particular, when it comes to how they talk about their anxiety. And to make a very long story short, kids will talk about having some fears and some types of anxieties that usually don't match up with what the parents think the problem is. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of better understanding the sources of those differences so that we can better do assessments and obviously better treatment for adolescents who are anxious. And Andy also recently published a book, which is called The Early Careers Researcher's Toolbox, and it's also packed with lots of really practical advice on becoming a very productive academic researcher. And lastly, we have Dr. Henry Lee Teuk. You guys know her from previous webinars. She's a postdoctoral fellow with me here in New York at Together CBT, and her background is also in kids and adolescents, particularly who are experiencing anxiety, trauma, and oppositional defiant disorders. So Henri-Lee can provide the child perspective, whereas Ilyse and Andy can also provide more of the parenting perspective. And I don't really have an expertise in many of these issues when it comes to parenting. I have lots of grievances as a parent myself. But not a lot of expertise, so I'll mostly be taking on
surely parenting twins. She's got twins, so surely you've got something to offer with that, Amelia.
Yeah, there's lots of grievances for sure, but I don't know about the advice. But I'll be mostly moderating and see what amazing insights you guys have. So very quickly, the reason that you guys are here today or are listening to this webinar later is because parenting is hard. But parenting during a pandemic is extra hard. And we are faced with an incredibly challenging situation where if we are lucky enough that we still have our jobs, that we can work from home, now we also have the second job, which is to be a full-time parent, right? If we have jobs, usually we're not with our kids all day. They're either with a grandparent, a nanny, another caregiver, a daycare, school, right? They're somewhere. They're not with us all the time if we're working. Now, all of a sudden, we have to manage our work. And again, that's a good problem to have because many people, unfortunately, don't have that situation at the moment. We have to parent our kids. And we also have to deal with all the emotional pressure that comes with facing a pandemic and facing a global crisis of a magnitude that we've never seen before. So it goes without saying, this is really hard. I don't need to keep telling you guys how hard this is. You all know it. That's why you're here. So what I thought we could do first is go through a few of the questions that people have been asking me and asking us over the past few weeks as we've done these webinars, questions related to parenting. So we can go through those, see what the panelists have to say. And again, as we do that, feel free to submit additional questions that we can tackle today. So here are the key questions that we've heard. How to balance working from home and parenting, which is what I was just mentioning. How to become a de facto teacher, and how to help our kids with their schoolwork. How to check in on our kids, right, and make sure that we understand what they're going through. It's easy to make assumptions about our kids being anxious or not anxious enough or this or that, and ultimately we don't really quite know, to the point of Andy's research, until we actually ask and have solid conversations with them. Other questions that have come up: how to find time and energy to engage in self-care, how to help college-age kids who are stuck at home, right? So for some of you out there who have older kids and your kids were on the path of independence and they're sophomores, juniors, seniors in college, and you were starting to see them, only a few times a year, and they were beginning to build their life as an adult, and now they're living in your basement, right? And now you're living in the spare room that you had made into your exercise room, right? And that's creating a lot of tension in terms of navigating independence, autonomy, and also dependence from the family. And also another question that people have been asking a lot is how to give our children a sense of normalcy, right? We are all feeling very out of sorts, right? We are not quite sure where we're standing, where we're going, what's happening. So in the midst of all that uncertainty that we have about our own path and our own trajectory, how can we create a sense of normalcy for our kids? So those are the main questions that I've heard. So what I thought we could do now is I want to take a step back and ask one of the panelists. We can get a volunteer. Maybe we can start with Ilyse. Actually, we can start with Ilyse.
Sure. I'm game.
And what we can do is ask you, Ilyse, to pick one of these questions that we've been hearing and tell us a little bit more about what is your recommendation from your work with clients, from your expertise in cognitive behavioral therapy, and also from your own experiences, quite frankly, and those of people in your life, as to how can we tell people, how can we help them find better ways of coping with any of these issues. And then Andy and Henri-Lee, as you have any thoughts on that, feel free to chime in. And then, Andy, you can pick the next question and we can sort of take it like that. And in the meantime, we'll be getting more questions from the attendees. So Ilyse, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm going to go with time and energy for self-care, which is funny because it's something that I actually talk to parents about all the time prior to this. And it's even become a more critical issue since this has all started, right? Because we don't have space and we don't have time, right? Our kids are with us 24/7. So I've been talking a lot about this, and this maybe bleeds a little bit into the how to balance working from home and parenting too. Because I think the most critical thing for both of these things, but I'll focus on the self-care one, is scheduling, and particularly night before scheduling. So this has been kind of my soapbox issue for a while. Listen, we don't know what 2 days from now, 3 days from now is going to look like, right? But we usually have a pretty clear sense of the next day. In terms of, what our work responsibilities are, perhaps if we have a spouse or partner, what their responsibilities are, what our kids have to do for school, and so on. So what I've been recommending is every night before you go to bed, think through the next day and have a schedule for yourself. Now, there's a lot of benefits to this. Part of what's beneficial, again, from the schooling perspective, is that you can kind of tell your kids when they'll be doing their school and what to expect and whatever. But from a self-care perspective, I think setting a schedule is the only way that parents are able to make sure that they get some time to themselves, right? Because what happens is in a completely unscheduled day, like we've been having, the day just goes, right? It goes and you're putting out fires and you're dealing with, math questions and all that sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden it's 9 o'clock at night and you're totally wiped out. So if you can create a schedule, again, just for the next day, where you're saying, all right, here's what we're going to do. I'll make this up. The kids are going to do school in the morning, and then we'll do a lunch, and then we'll do a quote recess in the backyard or whatever. And then from 4 to 6, I'm going to let the kids watch screens, right? And at that 4 to 6 time, I am going to go and do a workout app in the basement, or I'm going to go for a walk around the neighborhood, or I'm going to go Zoom chat my best friends from college. Whatever that self-care is for you, you can schedule it in and ensure that it gets in. And by the way, it can be 15 minutes long. Some of these exercise apps are like 7-minute workouts. You know, you can call a friend for 5 minutes just to check in. You can text, you know, briefly with someone. These don't have to be long stretches of self-care, but they have to be enough so that you feel like you've had some time to yourself and that you've been able to, you know, explore maybe some part of yourself that's not like work or parenting related in some small way. So that's really what I've been emphasizing. And I'll tack on there, and the rest of you guys will probably have more to say about this. I work kind of from the parent side, so I help the parents and not so much the kid stuff. But what I will say is I think strategic use of screen time, which again, I've always talked about, is way more critical now, because screen time is often the only time we've got, right? It's the only time we know. Now, again, this is for parents of slightly older kids, of slightly younger kids. Yeah. It may be that you've got to work things in during their nap times, right? So that might be the equivalent of screen time. But I'm such a fan of strategic use of screen time because that's the way you get self-care. So that's, I'll stop there. I have a lot more to say, but I'll stop there for now and see if anybody else has any questions or if you guys have any thoughts, other panelists.
No, I think all of those are really important points, particularly the scheduling piece, because oftentimes it's quite inconsistent with how we might have done or accomplished tasks before the pandemic. We might have thought, well, let me get a big chunk of time over the weekend, over the next few days to do some of that self-care. We don't usually conceptualize as things we do in tiny chunks, because oftentimes there's a lot more day to play with. Now there isn't. There's a lot less day to play with. So I think that those points really hone in on the context that we're all living in right now.
Yeah, and you have to get creative too. I mean, here's the thing: like you mentioned, Annie, which is a good point. Like having large swaths of time versus not. So you may be someone who previously was like a marathon runner, right? Well, now may not be the time to train for a marathon. So you've got to get creative and say, all right, well, like I've got 15 minutes, you know, what can I do in 15 minutes? And again, there's some really interesting apps. There's so much out there now, so much content out there for people looking to do things in new ways and do them on screens and so forth. So you might not be able to do the exact self-care that you did before, but you can find creative ways to make it happen, at least on a small scale.
Totally, and it's really about, again, I think it's totally like what you guys are saying, right? It's really about finding that moderation and finding that use of screen time or whatnot that actually like serves everyone's needs, right? Allows your kid to have the fun that they want to have and the distraction that they need, but also quite frankly gives you time to do things. And what I encountered this, you know, and as I talk to also friends and clients for parents, is that people then feel very guilty about that. And there's like this guilt, and the way that I usually come back to that is to say, you know, like, it's not that you're putting your kid in front of the iPad so that you can go and have margaritas with your friends, you know. You're probably putting your kid in front of the iPad so you can finish dinner, finish folding laundry, and answering 2 calls from work, you know. So I think there's this, you know, we have this preconceived notion of screen time is bad and cookies are bad and ice cream is bad. And I think that in this day and age, like sitting your kid in front of the iPad or the TV with a cookie, again, you know, if it's serving a purpose that it's allowing you to then do more things so that you can keep your lives going, it takes on a very different meaning than when we usually think of, oh, you're quote unquote a lazy parent who, you know, just like puts their kid in front of the TV and goes and has fun by themselves. So
yeah,
that's kind of how I've been approaching it too and talking to people about. And I think it's really hard to let go of that guilt.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. What I find with my, because I work with a lot of parents of young kids, and what I found really striking is that parents have not much willingness to lower their standards right now. They still want to be #1 model parent. They still want to do everything. No screens, super creative, like you name it. And I have to keep reminding my patients, like, you guys, this is not normal times. First of all, you shouldn't be aspiring to be the world's best parent, even in the best of circumstances, but like under these circumstances, there is no way, there's no way. And you've got to modify your standards so you can stay afloat, right? Because your kids need you to stay afloat, right? And that's where self-care is so important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And especially because, you know, what I think is particularly challenging right now is that we don't necessarily have an end date, right? So it really feels like a marathon, and it feels like a Groundhog Day marathon, if you will.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the farthest thing from a sprint, as you could probably imagine. So, you know, in any other situation, if you knew, okay, this is only for 2 weeks, this is only for whatever many weeks, it could be easier to be like, okay, I'm going to be super mom or super dad or super parent and get all of my work done and, you know, be with my kids all the time and play with them all the time and get by with 4 hours of sleep because it's only 2 weeks or because it's only whatever much amount of time. But I think, and you could still argue that probably philosophically and emotionally, that's still not the right thing to do, but at least you could begin to envision what that plan would look like, even if it's probably not a great plan. In this situation, we don't even know when any of this is ending. So finding ways to create more space for us and more space so that we can, you know, not feel so emotionally drained and recharge a little bit, or at the very least get things done. I think it's more important than ever because, you know, otherwise we're just really going to run ourselves to the ground as parents.
Yeah, definitely.
So, all right, so let's move on to another question. Andy, it is your time to pick a question from the slide and run with it.
Sure, yeah. So I want to pick the how to balance work from home and parenting, because it deals or dovetails with a lot of what Ilyse was just talking about. You know, for many of us, our periods of self-care were large blocks of time. You know what was another large block of time? Our work schedules. Our work schedules oftentimes we're in this completely different environment sometimes, large blocks of time, 9 to 5, sometimes, you know, something's bleeding over into the weekend, and we could usually count on those places to get things crossed off our list. Now we don't have that space. What do we do? It turns out that some of the strategies that Ilyse was talking about actually apply to work from home context as well. There's actually a really good book that Emilia and I use a lot for some of our productivity workshops called How to Write a Lot. It deals specifically with writing, but a lot of the strategies that are in there generalize to other kinds of work tasks. It's a very short book. I think the second edition was published in 2018. The author is Paul Sylvia. Shouldn't take you more than a couple of nights worth of reading to get through. But the basic steps are the following. Whatever thing you have on your project list, whatever work task you have on your list, break it down into manageable chunks. Something you can do in about 15 to 20 minutes time each thing, right? And then as you build out that schedule that Ilyse was mentioning, that next day schedule, after about a week or two of doing that, you will find patterns. You will see places that reliably show up as the kind of place where 15 to 20 minutes worth of work can happen, right? Like screen time, like nap time. And then the trick is to then implement a strategy such that when you go into that 15, 20 minutes, that reliable piece of time that you can find, whether it's a range of time or even a specific time, like 10 a.m. to 10, 20 a.m. in the morning, or what have you, you go in and say, I'm going to attack that top line task on my list, that 15-minute task here, I'm going to do it there, and then there, and then there. It's a strategy that looks vastly different from the way many of us work. But if you break your tasks down into manageable chunks and then attack them as the time comes up, over time, you're going to be surprised over what you're able to get done. Because at first it's going to seem very foreign. Wait, I'm going to have to stop now, even though I'm very used to just keeping on going. So breaking things down into manageable chunks, and then finding places in your daily schedule where you can reliably identify that time to cross it off your list. It can do a world of good during this context. We also happen to think, at least Emilia and I, when we do these our stay productive kind of workshops, we also tend to think that tends to be an optimal strategy outside. of the pandemic, because oftentimes we can't, although we might like to work in these big chunks of time, oftentimes they don't wind up being all that feasible. So if you practice this during the pandemic, you might wind up finding that it'll wind up being of use to you after all this is done.
Definitely.
Totally.
I would throw in there
Eileen.
too. Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think that's also a really good strategy for limiting your media intake, your intake of social media and whatnot, is to like put that on the schedule too. So if like, 10 to 10:20 is the time you're going to be doing X task for work, turn off your phone if you can, or, whatever it is, don't check apps during that time. And you can even schedule in when you check your social media, et cetera, to really keep a limit on that and boundaries on that.
Yeah, the other thing we suggest when you do that, when you have that cross off list time, that 10 a.m. to 10:20 time, turn everything else off. Knock off your connectivity, turn off your phone, just make it so that there really is nothing else that can get in the way when you're actually in that space, so that you make maximum use of the time. I'm glad you mentioned that, Alana. That's helpful.
Yeah, exactly. And, just like, I chime in on that, just like you, Wendy, and Eileen were saying, creating that discipline in a way, and that routine. And it's so simple to say, well, of course I'm not going to check my phone, or of course I'm not going to do this, but then we do it. So sort of getting very tactical about creating those chunks of time and what is allowed and what isn't. Again, because it's like, I feel like it's so easy for all of us really to overestimate how much control we have of ourselves in the moment, and then it's very easy to sort of get distracted with many things. So
especially now.
Yeah, especially now, nobody has an attention span anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, awesome. Any other thoughts on that question before we move to another question?
Maybe one more really quick thing, which
is
if you are lucky enough to have a partner, to try to work with your partner to figure out when they're going to be working versus you're going to be working, and being also very strategic about that too. Because I think what I've been hearing is that in homes where both parents work, it seems to be that one parent is sort of working more, and then one parent is doing more of the schoolwork. And I think you have to really keep lines of communication open to make sure that that doesn't happen, and to make sure that you have the time you need and your partner has the time they need. And again, really continuing to talk about this as this goes on.
Yeah, this is, and as I was saying that, I just came up with a bit of an idea that I've been kind of cooking in my head. So I haven't implemented it yet. So if anyone wants to try it and let us know how it goes, please, you know how to find me, you know how to find us. But when you do have that situation where inevitably one parent, based on the type of work they do or the personality or anything else, they do end up spending more time with the kids during the week and helping with schoolwork and all that stuff. I think that one way to rebalance that imbalance is to think of this radical idea, this radical thing we used to have, which was called weekends. And because now all the days are the same, right? Yeah. But if you're the one of the parents who, and again, if we're people who are able right now to work from home, are also people who probably work some during the weekend, because that means that you do project-based work with a laptop, most likely, right? So it's not that people necessarily have a Monday to Friday schedule, but if the parent who's doing most of the work and actually focus on getting their things done Monday to Friday the most, and then they take the kids most of the time during the weekend, or for a good chunk of the weekend, to even if it's not to the schoolwork necessarily, but to have fun, to walk around, to play, whatever the case might be. I think that can also help sort of rebalance the amount of work that parents are doing as well. But again, that requires a lot of planning. It also requires a lot of awareness of the distinction between weekdays and weekends. With all jokes aside, it's really, really difficult right now for, I think, everyone, right? Things that we were saying, which I think is a big take-home message from today, and it's we're all experiencing this in a way that is different, and sort of connecting with other people, particularly with our kids, from the standpoint of asking questions, and instead of assuming that this is what they're thinking or this is what they're feeling. I think that's a great that's a great first approach, right? So if people watching this or, later, or people who are joining now, if you don't remember anything else, right, from today, I think the piece about asking more questions and sort of trying to really get into the experience, not just of your kids, but of everybody else in your life, I think it's critical, because we're all experiencing this in very, very different ways.
So true.
So,
and different kids are different too, right? Like, my son is 9, and there's a wide range, among him and his friends of what their understanding of things are, of sort of what their like level of emotional maturity is. And so you also have to really know your own kid. Of course, being mindful of their developmental stage, but also just being mindful of them as people and what you feel like they need, which might be different than another kid their age, the thing that another kid their age needs.
Right. Yeah, totally. I was doing this other parenting webinar a few weeks ago, and one question that came up, which I think was very, very critical as well, was this. It was somebody who had a kid who was a teenager and who was refusing to sort of follow a number of the social distancing guidelines. So was still finding ways of sneaking around and seeing their friends. And, obviously this parent was taking this, was pretty frustrated and worried, and sort of taking this as a sign of, my kid is doing this on purpose, right? And sort of seeing it as an aggression in a way. But, it's, we discussed this as sort of probably having many layers. And sometimes, kids don't see danger in things in the same way as adults see it. Or sometimes they see the danger, but they interpret it differently. And also another point that I brought at the time is like, sometimes when we do see danger or when we feel anxious, we don't always do the safe thing, right? We don't always take that stance of protection, right? That's what we do most of the time. When we're anxious, we avoid, we protect. But sometimes there's this paradoxical increase in impulsivity, right? So the very same thing that makes us anxious, we sort of go and do it impulsively. So it's perfectly reasonable that somebody who may be, particularly an adolescent, might be fairly anxious about what's going on, but instead of sort of acknowledging that anxiety and working through that, they might be responding to it by taking more risks and sort of being more impulsive. And I think that's, again, I think that comes back to this point of people responding to the crisis, but also people responding to their anxiety differently. And sometimes the most impulsive people out there may be the ones who are actually the more anxious, but it's a very sort of like paradoxical behavior as well. Yeah. All right, so let's just do, let's just, just to begin to wrap up today, because I don't want to take too much time from everyone. We're, getting close to 45 minutes. I was wondering if, you guys could share one set of final advice that we can share with people today. And again, I'm going to be posting the webinar later, probably tomorrow, because there's many parents who couldn't, who were interested, but they couldn't join because children and parenting. So if there's any concluding thoughts, any parting thoughts that you'd like to share with people in terms of overall advice and guidance on how to, how to keep going and how to keep doing this parenting thing in this pandemic parenting in a way.
I'm happy to go first. I think one strategy or one tip that could work is really when you have moments with your children and you recognize they're doing something that is positive, that's important, that they're working on, like they're spending that extra little bit of time in their homeschooling, or they're spending that extra little bit of time working with their sibling and playing successfully, is really using praise and using a lot of positive praise for behaviors that they're working hard to display, considering how different everything is. Like there really isn't the same sense of normal, and it's going to be hard to create a sense of normal. And so being very specific about the behavior that you recognize, and just saying why you think it's really valuable as well is really important. So it's like, I really appreciate the fact you're helping your sibling with their work right now, because I'm not able to do that. And I can see that you're really caring for them and stepping up to help the family right now. And I really appreciate that. And if your child, that can be very useful for college age. It can be very useful for adolescents, certainly very useful for all children, even very young ones. They can hear the tone of voice and they understand that it's a positive reinforcement. And so I'm recommending, as much as is possible, is just being very kind and gentle with each other and giving that kind of verbal confirmation and validation that they're trying their best during this time period.
I'll go next. I would say from the parent side, I've been preaching a lot of just like emotional acceptance these days, because I think, you know, along the lines of what we were talking about before, parents seem to have such high expectations of themselves even now, and including feeling like they need to sort of have it all together for their kids, or, you know, not feel bad, not feel anxious, not feel sad. And we have to feel these things, because these things are par for the course right now, right? We're all feeling a lot of different negative feelings, often all at the same time. And the goal isn't to not feel these things at all. The goal is just to figure out, what do we do with these feelings? How do we respond to these feelings in a way that sort of, you know, helps us to manage them? So I'll kind of throw out a plug for emotional acceptance and self-compassion for parents.
Awesome.
I'll go next. So, you know, a big chunk of what we're all going through right now is being asked to take on roles that we didn't have before the pandemic. And when you take on new roles, there's a lot of uncertainty that occurs after you start taking it on. You know, and one of the biggest pieces of uncertainty usually revolves around, well, I have this I'm doing now. You know, my kids are learning this part of the lesson plan now. But there's going to be more things they're going to be learning later on, and so things are going to stack up upon each other. You know, one of the silver linings in all this is that especially at the beginning, our schedules all looked very chaotic. We didn't know how to fit everything in one place. But over time, you know, we are stuck in the same place, and we're human. We're going to wind up developing patterns, you know, predictable spaces where things tend to happen. So you know, it takes a little more effort, but being able to be mindful of those patterns, when are things happening, is going to go a long way for you to be able to then start doing one thing that reduces a lot of our anxiety: certainty. Sort of building out what's going to be expected of me as a teacher or as a parent or what have you on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. The more we can build that out, the less we're worrying about what the next day is going to be, and the more it's going to be easier for us to actually be mindful of what we're doing right now.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I was actually taking notes as you guys were saying that. So it's a lot about positive reinforcement of our kids and of other people in our lives when they do the right thing, right? When our spouses do the dishwasher, positive reinforcement as well, or partners or significant others. Yeah, and then it's about really learning how to accept and in creating that emotional space that we all need, instead of trying to fight that. We should not be feeling great right now, and it's okay that we don't. And also trying to bring more of a sense of structure and predictability. So those are you guys are amazing. Those are very good pieces of advice. I'll just add the one that I mentioned before. For me, it's really all about learning to ask more and make less assumptions about other people and what they're thinking and how they're feeling. It's so easy to bring in our own templates and our own biases, and we do this with our children, we do it with our partners, we do it with family members or friends, we do it with coworkers, we do it with our bosses. So I think sort of learning to take a bit of a step back and asking a bit more before assuming, I think that could be very helpful, particularly in these times, because, you know, we are, like Ilyse was saying, we are experiencing a lot of negative emotions, and we know that biases our thinking. So everything else equal, if we are having a negative emotion, we're much more likely to make a negative interpretation about something or someone else's behavior than if we are in a better mood. So we know that we have negative emotions. We know that we're more likely to be biased, to make negative interpretations. So more so than ever, I think it's super important that we try to, again, see if we can take a bit of a step back from that and ask a bit more before we actually assume. But all of the stuff we've been saying is great, but it takes time and practice, right? So it's also about being gentle with ourselves. This is a process, and this will take time, but these are I think all of these are very good starting points for everybody out there who's listening to this. So yeah. So before we wrap it up, does anyone else have any additional questions? We appreciate everyone coming in today and joining, particularly, you know, with the busy schedule of parents. But yeah, any other questions that you guys have, feel free to submit. Yeah, email. You have my contact info if you join the webinar, and we'll be doing another one next week. Next week will probably be more focused on communication skills in general for our relationships at home, at work, etc. So stay tuned. We'll be sending more info. Anyone else has any other thoughts? Any parting comments? We're good.
We're good.
Yeah, thank you for organizing this, Amelia.
Thank you, Amelia.
No, thank you so much, you guys, for taking time out of your busy day today for doing this. And stay tuned. I'll be sharing info later. I'm going to put this on my YouTube channel so we can find it there.
Great.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks.
And see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.